A dim, dilapidated room was filled with debris and discarded objects. Heavy footsteps echoed through the space. Figures clad in dark, futuristic armor, their faces obscured by glowing visors, moved with practiced precision. They advanced through a doorway, weapons raised. One of the figures, its visor glowing red, scanned the environment. The room was rendered in a grid of red lines, indicating a technological analysis. The figures continued their search, their movements sharp and alert. One pointed, spotting their target. A small, feral child with wild eyes and matted hair was revealed. The child bolted, fleeing from the armored figures. One of soldiers fired, a blast of energy erupting near the child. A commanding voice ordered the immediate deployment. A capture net was shown. The scene shifted to a brightly lit room, a stark contrast to the previous darkness. A young boy, his face pale and eyes wide with shock, lay in a pristine bed. The sunlight streaming through the window was the reason. The boy was in a children's protection zone. He tentatively touched his bare, scarred feet to the clean floor. This place was strange, very different of the abandoned building. The new room was flat, and he was offered food and clean clothes, a stark contrast to his previous life. He spent most of his time on the green hills that the place had. Other children approached him, questioning his solitary state. They invited him to play. He retreated from them, fear etched on his face. They chased after him, their laughter echoing in the open space. He stumbled, captivated by the sight of fluttering butterflies. The chase continued. Inside, a woman in a wheelchair watched the scene through a window. A staff member remarked if the boy could speak. The first staff member speculated that he might not have a disability, but simply hadn't learned to speak, suggesting he might understand some words and possibly comprehend them. Another staff member suggested the rescue team believe the child had been raised by animals. The first staff member continued, comparing him to the literary character Mowgli. The second member questioned about the story, and the first staff member laughed. They explained that the story predated the child arrival. The bell of a nearby church tower rang. Children rushed inside, excited and chattering. The feral boy, now among them, looked around with wide, curious eyes. A caretaker handed another child a letter. The boy, mistaking the sound of voices for his own thoughts, looked up. The caretaker explained that it was a letter, sometimes accompanied by gifts from a sponsor. The boy was asked if he had a sponsor. He didn't answer. The caretaker explained that a sponsor was a kind adult who cared for a child. The other children debated whether adults were inherently kind or bad, ultimately deciding on a compromise, half and half. One child spoke of another child, Matthew, who had received a large toy from his sponsor, and then another spoke of another child, Lily, who received clothes, both bragging about the gifts. The last spoke of a child called Joe who even talked with his sponsor. A girl declared that she didn't need a sponsor because her mother was coming to get her. She had promised to return after 100 nights, a period that would pass quickly. The boy and girl talked about the number of nights. The girl, holding a small lamp, expressed her hope for her mother's swift return. The boy looked out the window at the night sky. He blinked. The stars seemed to rush past, descending from the vastness of space. A fantastical image appeared, a hand holding a strange, alien-like figure. A teacher used similar figures to tell a story, claiming they were how they all became friends. A skeptical child, wearing glasses, refuted the tale. The other children questioned the teacher's honesty, believing her to be lying because they were young. The bespectacled child produced a large, old book. He claimed he had found it in the principal's study. He pointed to a passage describing how aliens had come to Earth long ago. Images of towering, otherworldly figures amidst modern buildings illustrated the story. Humans, it was claimed, fought back with a powerful weapon. But then, something unexpected happened. They alienated. The book, now closed, a single butterfly flitted past. The sound of the church bell. Children were called by name. The boy, identified as Maury, received a letter. It was from a sponsor. The caregiver stated. The boy, overwhelmed, clutched the letter, his eyes welling up. The girl came to him as she cried. The young boy, Maury, fidgeted, his gaze darting around the room. A girl, Radina, huddled nearby, crying, her face buried in her arms while she was yelling at him. Mori tentatively circled around her. Radina looked up, her eyes red and swollen, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. He offered her a partially eaten cookie. He cautiously approached, his eyes fixed on the offered treat. Radina explained that these were all the things she cherished. She clicked her tongue while taking the cookie from his hand. She confessed that 100 nights had long passed since her mother's promise, though her mother believed she couldn't count that high. Radina's voice cracked as she admitted her newfound loneliness. She collapsed, her small body racked with sobs. Mori gently placed his back on her back, offering a silent comfort. A faint smile flickered across Radina's tear-stained face. Mori wondered if the cookie was good to eat. With a hesitant slurp, he took the cookie, his eyes widening in surprise. The warmth of the sun cast long shadows across the room, illuminating the two children. Radina, picking up the letter, remarked that Mori couldn't read. She unfolded the paper, revealing a simple greeting. "Hello there." Confused, she wondered if that was the entirety of the message. Mori, captivated, reached for a vibrant blue flower lying on the floor that dropped from the envelope. He carefully picked it up, his small fingers tracing its delicate petals. The children, now asleep in their beds, lay peacefully. Mori, holding the blue flower, gazed at it with wonder. He was surrounded by a multitude of the same flowers, their vibrant color filling his vision. Again, he drifted off to sleep, the rhythmic chirping of crickets lulling him into slumber. The church bell rang, its clear tone echoing through the air. A caregiver called out to Mori, presenting him with a gift box, declaring his good fortune. Other children gathered, exclaiming in surprise at the size of the pile of presents. Mori, clad in a new red cloak, sat amidst a collection of toys and gifts, a picture book open before him. The children marveled at the colorful crayons and the talking doll, while Radina showed off the messy handwriting of the letter. They speculated about the nature of Mori's sponsor, questioning their motives and wealth. One suggested that perhaps a guilt that drove them to such generosity. Their eyes reflect the crayons. Mori started to use one. One of the other children explained to Mori how to use it. Mori expressed surprise at the crayons. Outside, the sun shone brightly, filtering through the windows. The director suggested doing laundry, and the children eagerly rolled up their pants. They gathered around washtubs, ready to help. Mori stomped his feet in the soapy water, delighted by the sensation. Radina, unimpressed, questioned their excitement. Mori, however, found the bubbles fascinating, declaring them fun. Dina warned against splashing, and Mori quickly called her by her name. She looked questioning. Radina then dashed off toward the open field. She called out, her voice filled with a newfound joy. She splashed water with her feet as she ran, creating a miniature spray. Her mother appeared, embracing her tightly. She was called Mom. The other children watched, their faces a mixture of emotions. Mori, standing apart, observed the reunion, a silent witness to the scene. Radina and her mother embraced, a picture of contentment. Radina saying goodbye to Mori and take care of himself, as her eyes is red from crying. She gave him instruction about eating properly. She was offering Mori all that she had. She also told Mori not to go around barefoot and told him to wear the shoes she brought. Radina, overwhelmed, hugged Mori tightly. Radina told him that he needed to be happy. With a smile, Mori hugged Radina. Radina, carrying a suitcase, waved goodbye to the other children. The children waved back, their faces reflecting a sense of loss. Mori retreated to the hilltop, his usual sanctuary. Despite the void left by Radina's departure, he didn't feel alone. He held a letter, a tangible reminder of his connection to his sponsor, someone who cared. The red cloak, a gift from his sponsor, felt as warm as sunlight, and the crayons and talking doll were a source of endless amusement, the fragrant letters. He clutched the letter and flower tightly, surrounded by a sea of blue blossoms. He pondered, his gaze distant, wondering about the nature of his sponsor and questioning their motives. And then he remembered his close friend hug. He wondered what this means. What that means is he, though. He thought, could this person be my mom? He packed his belongings into the bag, preparing for a journey. He stood under the night sky, gazing at the distant orphanage, a silent farewell. He set foot on the unknown path. He walked on an unpaved road, taking one step, then two, towards an uncertain destination. His purpose, to meet the person he hoped could be his mother. Mori awoke to the gentle nuzzling of cows in a barn, their soft mooing filling the space. One licked his face, startling him awake. The child woke up. He clambered out of the hay, his small figure dwarfed by the large animals. He was on train. The train he had boarded was taking him to his mother. The train rumbled along a desolate track, cutting through a vast, arid landscape. He put on his shoes. Mori gazed out at the passing scenery, his expression a mixture of wonder and apprehension. The vast, empty desert stretched out before him, under a sky full of clouds. His journey continued. He cautiously climbed a small rocky outcrop, pebbles scattering under his feet. He looked on the land once more, wondering. The boy continued to walk in the open. A group of rough-looking individuals, riding futuristic motorcycles, sped across the desert. Mori, spotting them, reacted with alarm, his eyes wide with fear. He instinctively ran, pursued by the menacing figures. The chase continued, the motorcyclists closing in, but another figure also is watching. The biker was looking at the open land. They wondered what it was. They questioned its humanity and size. One of the ruffians wondered if they could sell the strange creature, but hesitated. Another suggested consuming a part of it, reasoning that its small size wouldn't be missed. One member eyed its legs. A monstrous figure, large and imposing, intervened with a powerful kick. It demanded to know who had given them permission to touch the child. The aggressor, cowering, apologized to their boss. The monstrous figure dismissed the child's size as insignificant, then paused, his attention caught. Mori, confused, tilted his head. The monstrous being unleashed a blast of energy. The men recognized. They fled on their bike. The biker, clad in black and adorned with red horns, rode a sleek, futuristic motorcycle. The ruffians identified the newcomer as a rider, urging each other not to panic. They opened fire, their bullets proving ineffective against the rider's advanced technology. The rider retaliated, their own shots precise and deadly. The monstrous figure charged, delivering another devastating blow. He roared in fury. The rider continued their relentless pursuit, dodging attacks with ease. An explosion rocked from a monster attack on the rider. The monstrous figure recoiled, snarling. His hand crackled with energy, preparing for another strike. The rider jumped high, easily dodging. With swift, precise movements, the rider unleashed a final, decisive attack. A powerful beam of energy pierced the air, striking its target with devastating force. The rider, victorious, landed gracefully, their red eyes glowing. The intensity of the situation left the rider wondering. Mori, emboldened, puffed out his chest, imitating the rider's stance. The rider, after a moment of silence, identified the child as a human infant with a robotic companion called IA. A small, boxy robot hovered nearby, projecting a holographic display of the child's emotional state, fear, and nervousness. The rider addressed the child directly with a kind tone, reassuring him and offering assistance. He looked at Mori. The rider greeted Mori cheerfully, a stark contrast to his earlier ferocity. Mori, still apprehensive, looked at him with wide eyes. The rider reassured him that there was no need to be scared. The rider promised to take the boy home, extending a friendly hand. Mori's eyes sparkled with a glimmer of hope. He was instructed to follow. The rider, with a subtle smile, observed the child. He pondered their next course of action, acknowledging that while eating humans wasn't illegal, it was a social taboo. He reasoned that the child wasn't suitable for consumption anyway, due to its size and tenderness. The possibility of selling the child alive, perhaps as a toy, crossed his mind. He noted the child's surprisingly high-quality clothing, considering the possibility of an auction. Mori, sensing the shift in the rider's demeanor, hesitated. The rider noticed that Mori's clothes has a symbol in it. He grabbed his cloak and started to sweat, a sense of urgency overcoming him. He realized the time. He excused himself, claiming pressing matters. He asked Mori if he could find his way back, his tone surprisingly gentle. Assured by an unseen affirmation, the rider swiftly mounted his futuristic motorcycle and sped away. He vanished into the distance, leaving a trail of dust. A realization struck him. The symbol on Mori's clothing was one he recognized, one that could have cost him dearly. His robotic companion chided him for his cowardice. He coughed, trying to calm his dry throat, and then asked for water. He drank thirstily, spilling some down his chin. The water splashed as he coughed. Suddenly, Mori was clinging to his back, having somehow managed to board the motorcycle unnoticed. Startled, the rider demanded to know how the child had gotten on. He ordered the boy to get off, his voice rising in frustration. A small, rock-like creature popped up, identifying itself as stone, made the motorcycle lost balance. The rider, overwhelmed and clutching his head in pain from the impact. He looked over the paper on his lap. The letters and gift from before were there. The rider, still reeling for the impact, examined the scattered letters and gifts. He picked up a letter, noting its contents with a puzzled expression. Mori peeked at him, his curiosity piqued. The rider awoke with a start, roaring. AIA, the robotic companion, explained that it had been concerned about the rider's fluctuating body temperature and had covered Mori with some items for warmth. AIA also mentioned starting a fire. The rider thanked the robot. AIA suggested that Mori needed hydration. The rider agreed. Mori, carrying a water bottle, walked towards the fire. He paused, noticing the bottle. In a sudden, unexpected move, Mori splashed the rider with the water thanks to the same rock again. Droplets of water ran down the rider's face, shocking Mori. Mori, recognizing the rider, scrambled to gather the scattered belongings. The rider, his expression unreadable, watched the boy's frantic movements. Mori clutched the items protectively, his gaze fixed on the symbol adorning them. The rider recognized the symbol, the patch. It was a mark associated with a powerful and dangerous entity, one of the 7 fingers of him, the beginning and end of the universe. Only the owner of the patch, and who had his permission, to threaten them carelessly. The monsters, I reflected the blood. The rider pondered. The rider realized his initial assessment of the child was drastically wrong. Here was a seemingly ordinary human child, connected to a being of immense power, possessing items of significant value, and a letter filled with what seemed like genuine affection. The implications were staggering, suggesting that safely delivering the child could potentially earn a substantial reward. He was thinking how beneficial the kid was. AIA's battery indicator flashed, signaling low power. The rider prepared to resume their journey, his motorcycle gleaming. The arid landscape stretched before them. The rider confidently stated they were going. He considered himself a lifesaver, a rare occurrence, and boasted about his familiarity with the area. 2 creatures were shown greeting each other. The rider continued, portraying his actions as incredibly virtuous. He declared that their arrival was imminent, urging patience. He cautioned Mori to pay attention, his tone a mix of arrogance and condescension. Mori, distracted, was eating on a large beetle. AIA sound was muted. The rider, exasperated, yelled at Mori, demanding he spit out the insect. He stumbled, his movements frantic. He berated the boy for consuming potentially dangerous things. He carefully examined the beetle, explaining how to identify poisonous varieties, noting the bluish tint on their legs. He continued his lecture, describing other indicators of poisonous creatures, such as swollen roots on mushrooms or a blue coloration when threatened. He confirmed that Mori understood, hoping to avoid further complications. The rider was thinking of avoiding more problems. Mori, however, seemed more interested in examining AI, prodding it with a curious finger. He warned the boy against touching a dangerous plant, its tendrils reaching out. Mori, unheeding, sank into a patch of mud. The rider, frustrated, cautioned him to remain calm. He sank to the ground. Mori was drawing near the fire. Later, The writer, now slumped on the ground, questioned his actions. Mori offered a drawing, attempting to communicate, but the writer admitted his inability to understand. He noticed an inscription, Mori, and questioned if it was a name. Mori pointed at a crude depiction of the writer on the drawing. Mori pointed at the writer. The writer, surprised, questioned if the drawing represented him. He stared at the drawing intently, a thoughtful expression on his face. It was the first time anyone had drawn him. They sat together by the fire, under the starry night sky. AIA remarked on the writer's improved mood, which the writer vehemently denied. The robot then identified itself as the round object in the drawing, receiving a low score for observational skills, but a higher one for descriptive ability. The writer was thinking. The writer encouraged further artistic endeavors, suggesting more detail and sparkle. He then activated a device, checking their location and noting the rising sun. He declared their imminent arrival at their destination, just beyond a nearby hill. He urged Mori to hurry. He called out to him, warning of abandonment if he didn't keep up. His face showed a hint of concern. A question mark appeared on his face. Mori approached a small, lizard-like creature. He was wondering if it was a wild animal. The creature suddenly attacked, revealing sharp claws and fiery breath. It breathed fire, as the fire engulfs Mori. The writer, enraged, concerned about Mori. Flames raged, consuming Mori in a fiery inferno. The writer, weapon drawn, confronted the lizard, his expression a mix of anger and frustration. The lizard dodged the writer's shot, as the writer is running toward Mori. Reaching out to Mori, the flames intensified, swirling around him. He despaired as the flames intensified. The writer knew the child would not survive the intense heat. Just then, the red cloak Mori wore fluttered, a subtle movement in the midst of the chaos. It shielded Mori. Like a magical barrier, the cloak caused the flames to dissipate, one by one. A vortex of fire swirled, revealing a dark void at its center. Sparks flew as Mori, protected by the cloak, is unharmed. The writer and the two lizards stood, in shock. He checked on Mori, asking if he was okay. The writer admitted his shock. His eyes reflected anger. He turned to confront the lizard-like creatures, his anger reignited. The lizards stepped forward, protecting one another. The writer accused them of endangering Mori, his voice filled with a protective fury. He reminded them that Mori, too, was a child, nearly roasted by their actions. He raised the hand he was about to hit them with. AIA, the robotic companion, alerted the writer to an approaching presence from below. A massive, sandworm-like creature emerged from the earth, its enormous form casting a long shadow. The creature's gaping maw revealed rows of sharp teeth. The writer cursed, realizing it was an adult of the species. His priority shifted to getting Mori to safety. AIA confirmed the creature's approach. The sandworm, now fully emerged, towered over them, its roar echoing across the desolate landscape. As the adult tells its children to apologize for what happened. As the rider is stunned, he roared a challenge that he will let this pass like this. Mori, seemingly oblivious to the danger, was focused on a glittering object given by the lizard. He picked up a golden, crystalline shard, his eyes sparkling with fascination. He began to interact with it. Mori played with a feather, tickling one of the lizard creatures. The rider, baffled, questioned Mori's actions as the boy circled him. The sandworm lizard left with her childrens, as Mori waving to them. The lizard hid between his mother's legs. Mori, clutching the cloak, turned towards the rider. The rider reminded Mori of the near-death experience he'd just had, attributing his survival to the cloak. He explained the cloak's protective properties, its ability to regulate temperature and ward off flames, urging gratitude towards its giver. Mori clutched the cloak, his eyes wide with understanding. The child was surprised. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the landscape, the rider lay exhausted beside the dwindling campfire. Mori was near the rider and the fire. The scene was one of quiet contemplation. The rider requested data on humans from AIA. As the information loaded, various holographic displays appeared, showing data on human biology and development. AIA confirmed that this was all the available data. The writer mused that, given the limited information, Mori must indeed have a mother. AIA clarified that unlike their kind, who divide, humans reproduce, resulting in offspring. A flashback showed the ancient masters of Earth briefly leaving for space and returning. Many life forms have been born in the meantime, among them an animal with high greed and strong violence, humans. They desired ownership of everything, even things that didn't belong to them, leading to conflict and ultimately their decline. The writer, reflecting on this history, concluded that the powerful beings who had left the planet likely didn't care much for their offspring. He lay back, exhausted, while Mori drifted off to sleep. The writer checked on the boy, gently adjusting his position. He carefully grasped Mori's small hand, a moment of unexpected tenderness. Mori was holding him. Mori slept soundly. The writer gazed at the child, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He noticed Mori clutching something and instinctively reached out. He lay back down, a thoughtful expression on his face. Somewhere far away, a figure confirmed that the forest surrounding their destination was biodetected, meaning they couldn't have missed it, and speculated that the cloak's properties were responsible. Dark Fuhrer appeared, its glowing eyes fixed on their location. The figure vowed to find it, without fail. Mori awoke in a new, unfamiliar environment. He lay on soft grass, a stark contrast to the harsh desert he'd grown accustomed to. He looked at the view from above. He sat up, taking in the lush, green landscape. He observed his surroundings, a puzzled expression on his face. His eyes widened in surprise and wonder. The rider, carrying Mori, asked if he was awake. He directed the boy's attention to their destination. They had arrived at the city. Mori stepped into the city. He gazed at the towering structures, interconnected by bridges and walkways. He exclaimed in amazement, his eyes wide with wonder. The city's inhabitants, a diverse group of humanoids, greeted Mori with warmth and curiosity. They marveled at his small size and adorable appearance. The rider, however, was less enthusiastic, warning them of the cost of viewing and interacting with Mori. The writer showed how popular Mori is. Mori, he scoffed at their demands, reminding them of his previous leniency. He was welcomed. The inhabitants questioned the writer about Mori, curious about his origins and whether he was the writer's child. A character named Valentine addressed the writer, inquiring about his motives for raising a human. She cautioned against any ill intentions, reminding him that humans were no longer consumed. Valentine noticed the symbol on Mori's belongings, recalling having seen it during a previous trade negotiation. She deduced that the symbol's owners were likely in the city. The writer confirmed this, his expression suggesting a hidden agenda. Valentine pointed out Mori's black hair, similar to the person with the symbol. She wondered about their motives for being in the city. The writer, attempting to negotiate for supplies, haggled over prices, his frustration evident. The people there trying to scam him. He reluctantly agreed to a compromise, his patience wearing thin. The transaction complete, the writer turned his attention to AIA, suggesting they sell the robot's battery. AIA protested, deeming it a waste. The writer then considered selling Mori's belongings, much to AIA's dismay. He noticed the golden crystalline shard Mori had acquired. Valentine identified it as a Tomas stone, a valuable item. The stone broke. She reached out. A closer inspection revealed the stone's self-repairing properties and its ability to emit light. The writer, initially impressed, learned that the stone's popularity had rendered it practically worthless. He scoffed, suggesting Mori take it. Mori, clutching the stone. He walked out. The stone was being touched by Mori's hand. He placed the stone on the ground, his intentions unclear. A mysterious, cloaked figure approached, remarking on Mori's cuteness. Mori tried to escape, running from him, but he has short legs. The figure reached out, attempting to capture the Mori. Mori! A surge of energy emanated, surrounding Mori to whole. Mori, startled and frightened. He looked back, his eyes wide with fear. The figure checked his surrounding for any witnesses. Mori, tears welling up. He screamed in terror. The city's inhabitants dispersed, confusion and fear evident in their movements. The rider, enraged, searched for Mori, calling out his name in a desperate plea. The cloaked figure, Valentine, reacted with bewilderment. She looked at the rider with a questioning look. The rider, startled by Mori's sudden disappearance, felt a surge of panic. He called for a halt, his voice echoing through the deserted area. AIA initiated a scan, its sensors sweeping the surroundings. The rider demanded the cloaked figure stop, his hand outstretched. He pursued the figure, navigating the treacherous terrain with practiced ease. He questioned what had just happened. The figure, surprised by the rider's pursuit, was bewildered. AIA reported detecting a life form with a specific temperature in the figure's pocket, confirming Mori's abduction. The rider, enraged, accused the figure of taking Mori, resolving to intercept them. He instructed AIA to assist, and the robot complied. The rider continued his relentless pursuit, leaping across precarious gaps and scaling towering structures. AIA, analyzing the situation, scanned the town. Its sensors mapped the complex network of pathways and obstacles. It identified 14 possible escape routes. Based on speed and direction, AIA narrowed it down to Route 2. The rider, determined, prepared to follow the designated path. AIA indicated that their destination was up ahead. The cloaked figure continued their escape. The rider followed. He moved to the bridge on the left. An artist who spent half a year creating his masterpiece by attaching sand grains grain by grain as the rider smashed the sculpture as he was chasing. AIA, adjusting its calculations, redirected the rider to Route 11. The rider scaled the building. Valentine looked frightened. Mori, trembling with fear, peeked out from his confinement. AIA confirmed their arrival at the predicted destination point. The rider burst through a doorway. He landed dramatically, his presence commanding attention. He traversed the environment. He was serious. AIA indicated that the target was directly ahead. The rider, leaping and maneuvering with agility. He continued his relentless chase, his determination unwavering. The figure, startled by the rider's sudden appearance, was alarmed. He stumbled. The rider activated his motorcycle, launching it into the air. The motorcycle sped towards the figure, a projectile aimed with precision. The figure, now cornered, questioned the rider's aggressive pursuit. The rider, his voice filled with fury, demanded Mori's return, accusing the figure of kidnapping his human. He looked flustered and shocked. AIA, scanning the figure's voice, confirmed with near certainty that it was Mori. The rider reiterated his demand, his anger escalating. The figure, denying the accusation, insisted they didn't know what the rider was talking about. The figure claimed ownership of what they possessed, questioning the rider's motives. AIA reported Mori's rising fear levels. The rider, enraged, threatened violence, demanding the figure release Mori. The figure refused, declaring their intention to raise the cute child themselves. He reiterated her intention to raise Mori. The rider, furious, insulted her, as she recognizing him as the infamous rider, a simple-minded outlaw with an illegal creation, AIA. She questioned his ability to raise a human, given his dangerous reputation. She retorted that she could raise Mori with more love, implying the rider was keeping the child for selfish reasons. The rider proposed letting Mori choose between them. She declared that Mori's choice wasn't important. AIA warned the rider that firing a gun in town would put him on the wanted list, a fact he already knew. He dismissed the warning, stating it wasn't important. Mori, trapped in the dark confines of Figure's pocket, screamed in fear. He felt trapped and alone. Suddenly, a voice spoke to Mori from the darkness, the doll his mother had given him. The doll reminded him to use the bathroom before bed. Mori, startled, reacted with surprise. The figure, sensing an opportunity, offered a compromise. She would take Mori's head, and the rider could have the body. AIA reported its remaining energy at 63%. The rider calculated that his weapon had enough power to blow off the figure's head, but the cloak's compression might interfere, and he needed to get to Mori first. She, ignoring the rider's internal calculations, dared him to listen to her. Suddenly, she noticed a yellow water under her leg. She cried out in frustration. Mori used her as a dog. The rider, seizing the opportunity, announced himself as Mori's but guardian and freed the child from Valentine's grasp. The figure, enraged, called them both filthy. Mori, now free, clung to the rider. The rider struck the figure's arm, severing it along with the jewel she wore. He ignored her. He warned her that if she touched Mori again with her filthy hands, she would be forced to crawl like a snake. Acknowledging the loudness of the gunshot, the rider prepared to leave with AIA. He secured Mori on after changing his shorts, his motorcycle, and sped away. Mori, relieved, sighed in exhaustion. The rider, pleased with their escape, laughed triumphantly. He complimented Mori's quick thinking. The doll congratulated him. The rider and Mori, now riding together on a motorcycle, admired the majestic scenery. AIA, considering their next move, suggested the fastest route. The rider declared their destination, Whale's Cradle. He yelled to Mori to get down. The sky started. The rider with Mori kept climbing. Mori looked at the view. He looked surprised and happy. They went to the top with the landscape in view. The rider and Mori traveled a lot. They stood atop a grassy peak, the vast expanse of the sky and distant mountains stretching before them. Mori spotted delicate white flowers amidst the greenery. The rider and AIA traversed a fallen tree trunk, their journey continuing through a lush forest. They entered a dilapidated building, its walls crumbling and overgrown with roots. As night fell, they sought shelter under a rocky overhang, a small fire providing warmth and light. Another day, strange, spindly creatures loomed in the distance, their forms barely visible in the mist. The rider ignited a light, startling Mori. AIA, scanning the environment, noted that the creatures feared bright spotlights and saved the information. They continued their trek up a steep incline, the wall adorned with graffiti proclaiming "No War" in multiple languages. The rider leaned against a weathered wooden shield, holding Mori close. They floated on a makeshift raft across a body of water, the tranquil surface reflecting the sky. In the darkness, numerous red eyes peered from the depths, an unsettling sight. Suddenly, monstrous creatures with gaping maws lunged from the water, attacking them. Mori grabbed a glowing green shard as he draws at the rider's face while sleeping. The rider and Mori continue their journey in night. Mori looked at the full moon. He was being cared. Whales. A whale. The rider rowed to find it. Mori showed his amazement. The rider smiled. He put the auto mode. Mori looked at the stars. He touched a whale. He looked in wonder. Whales were everywhere. Where I am now. As Mori was in an embrace of a woman, labeling him as lovely round one, my round one, as Mori starts to open his eyes. Was all that a dream, as he was protected in the rider's jacket. The rider, seeing Mori awake, greeted him. He reminded Mori that AIA's assistance was crucial to their journey. He suggested that if Mori was dissatisfied, he could drive himself, to which AIA enthusiastically agreed. The rider protested, reminding the rider that he had created AIA. The rider continued to drive. The rider, observing the unchanging landscape, expressed his sentiment that the place remained the same. He proposed they walk quietly from that point, concerned that waking the creatures they had seen earlier would force them to take a longer route. He offered to show Mori something amazing beneath the surface. AIA, interjecting, questioned if Mori was over-equipped, noting his super defensive cloak. The rider playfully suggested rolling Mori up into a ball. AIA warned of abusing. The rider, persistent, urged Mori to try it just once. They looked at the horizon. AIA was worried. The rider sensed something approaching at high speed. He got ready. AIA identified the approaching entities as hunters sent from the town, reporting a speed of 491.52 kilometers per hour. The rider, surprised and apprehensive, realized the gravity of the situation. He looked to his tail. He was serious. He decided to change plans and move quickly on the bike. The rider sped away on his motorcycle. AIA, tracking the pursuers, indicated their rapidly decreasing distance, with arrival estimated in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The countdown continued, now at 53 seconds. Mori, clinging to the rider, looked on with trepidation. The pursuers closed in, their forms becoming visible. AIA declared, "I see it." The rider, gripping his weapon, braced for a confrontation. The pursuit intensified. Mori was surprised. The rider questioned what the approaching object was. A swirling vortex appeared in the sky. A large figure, approached heavily armored and cloaked, descended from the vortex. Mori looked scared. A colossal, cloaked figure descended, radiating an aura of immense power. The rider, stunned, expressed his disbelief, never having encountered a hunter capable of manipulating black holes. He questioned the pursuer's decision to hire such a formidable opponent, simply because he had fired a few shots in town. The cloaked figure set his sight. Mori cuddled. The cloaked being, the rider, clutching Mori protectively, asked AIA for their chances of winning if he fought with all his might. AIA calculated a mere 16% chance of success. The rider exclaimed. AIA clarified that there was a 7% margin of error due to potential natural disasters, though it trusted its consistently accurate probabilities. The rider affirmed AIA's assessment. The rider, realizing the odds, decided to avoid a direct confrontation. He declared it was now or never and brandished his weapon. With a burst of speed, the rider ascended, attempting to evade the cloaked figure. He launched his motorcycle into the air. He commanded AIA to release its limiter. AIA, complying, accessed overclock mode, a warning message flashing across its interface. The motorcycle, now glowing with an intense red energy, rocketed upwards, AIA warning of potential fractures due to impact, as rider shoots a shot to the distance at the mountaintop, causing an avalanche. He declared that with maximum output and full speed, reaching the bridge would secure their escape. Mori, wide-eyed and startled, clung to the rider. As they tried to escape the avalanche, they were moving fast. The rider urged Mori to hold on tight. Mori, terrified, cannot close his small mouth as they hurtled forward. The rider, spotting the bridge in the distance, focused on his objective. He continued to speed towards the rider and Mori. They were flying. The cloaked figure extended its hand, manipulating a swirling vortex. The rider maintained his unwavering determination to reach the bridge. Suddenly, a snowflake. The cloaked figure questioned the rider's intent. The cloaked figure leaped onto the rider's motorcycle, attempting to grab him. The rider, enraged, struggled against the figure's grasp. They fought. They held tight. He growled. The figure moved. It reached for Mori, but the child, startled, evaded its touch. The figure, surprised, paused. The rider was about to retaliate. He went over it. He noticed the lack of knowledge of the figure of this place. The rider and Mori found themselves atop a colossal, slumbering whale. The cloaked figure noticed his escape plan, but he was too late. As a whale emerged from the snow of the avalanche, while the rider used it as his escape route, AIA initiated a retrieval of the motorcycle. The cloaked figure stared at Mori as the whales flied to the distance. The rider starts opening his eyes. AIA addressed the rider. The rider, disoriented, wondered if he had passed out, attributing his shortness of breath to the sudden increase in altitude. AIA confirmed Mori's well-being. It declared that waking the sleeping whale had been a successful strategy, adding that they would move to the ravine when the cradle became uncomfortable. The rider questioned their current location. He, catching his breath, realized they were back in the city, a black hole looming ominously above. The sprawling metropolis materialized before them, a city nestled amidst towering, mist-shrouded peaks. Mori, perched atop the rider's shoulders, pointed excitedly at the sight. Black birds scattered into the gray sky. The rider, considering their next move, suggested they head towards the city's entrance. AIA questioned if the rider was really planning to enter with his current, conspicuous appearance. AIA, ever practical, reminded him of the warrant for his arrest and advised a disguise. The robotic companion suggested changing their hair and clothes at the very least. The rider, grumbling, complied, make his hair down and changing the shape of his horns. With a nod, he told Mori they were ready to go. Mori, distracted, looked around searching for the rider and questioning who is that. The rider, confused by Mori's sudden shift in demeanor, wondered what was wrong. He picked Mori up, trying to get his attention, reassuring him it was just him, rider. AIA pointed out that Mori might not recognize him with the changed hair. Ryder, exasperated, demanded what he was supposed to do then. Then, a plan came together in AIA's processing unit. AIA suggested a clever disguise. The small robot snuggled under the hood of Mori's red cloak. Mori, looking slightly bemused, sat back upon the rider's shoulders, now with AI perched atop his head, completing their makeshift disguise. As they proceeded through a stark, angular passage, Mori swung his legs, prompting AIA to scold him for being too noisy. She also pointed out that the rider is also noisy. They were greeted by a strange, vase-like being with a dark orb hovering above it. The being welcomed them to the city and offered assistance. The riders stated their purpose was to meet the patch. Mori rummaged through his satchel, retrieving the sealed invitation letter. The vase being projected a swirling constellation of symbols, asking which one they sought. The rider, examining the intricate display, suddenly understood. He realized that from the organization's leader to its members, all could use the patch's insignia. He hadn't realized they could be scattered in different locations. Mori, confused, asked who they should go to. He then pointed to a shimmering light within the projected constellation. After another quick rummage in his satchel, he offered a small, blue forget-me-not flower to the vase being. The being observed the flower. It explained there was only one person associated with that symbol. A section of the wall shimmered and dissolved, revealing a dark doorway. The rider wondered if it was a door. AIA speculated it might be some kind of portal. The rider cautiously reached out to touch the shimmering surface. The being reassured them that they would arrive regardless of which direction they walked through. The rider thanked the being. He and Mori, with AIA tucked securely under his hood, stepped through the portal. They plunged into darkness. They emerged into a vibrant, sunlit field. Mori, awestruck, looked around. A large, elegant house stood amidst the greenery. The rider remarked on the incongruity of a field within a city and the unique style of the house. AIA commented that it seemed like the residence of someone with unique tastes. As Mori skipped happily through the tall grass, the rider followed, worried he might fall. They approached the ornate gates of the house. The rider reminded Mori and AIA to stay close, warning them that entering without an invitation could be fatal. AIA confirmed her understanding. The rider, frustrated, struggled to figure out how to open the gate. Mori, peering through the bars, spotted someone inside. He saw a woman with long, dark hair. Remembering his dream about his mom that has the same hair, he quickly scrambled over the gate, much to the rider's surprise. The rider called out to Mori, panicked, reminding him of the danger and ordering him to return. Cursing under his breath, the rider began frantically searching for a way to open the gate. Inside, Mori landed softly on the polished wooden floor and began exploring the house. He cautiously pushed open a door and entered a sunlit hallway. He continued to explore, peering around corners. His footsteps echoed as he walked down the hallway. He found himself face to face with a woman. He found himself face to face with a tall, bird-like woman. She, startled, questioned his identity and how he had gotten in. Unsure of what to do, she wondered aloud if she should inform someone of the unexpected guest, explaining she hadn't been told to expect anyone. A breeze rustled through his hair and gently stirred the petals of the flower. Startled, Mori looked around, his eyes widening in surprise. One of the bird women, noticing his movement, called out to him to wait. Mori, startled, darted down the hallway. He reached a door at the end of the hall and opened it. He slipped into the room. His wide eyes glittered with wonder as they adjusted to the dim light. He stopped at the doorway and gasped, his gaze fixed on the sight before him. A massive figure, cloaked in darkness and adorned with multiple golden eyes, filled the room. Mori, dwarfed by the figure's presence, stood frozen in the dimly lit space. A vision, warm and comforting, flashed before his eyes. A younger girl with bright red hair, Radina, embraced by a woman with long, flowing red hair, her mother. Confused, Mori blinked, his expression shifting from awe to bewilderment. The massive, multi-eyed figure slowly knelt, extending a gloved hand towards Mori. A rush of memories, dreamlike and fragmented, flooded Mori's mind. A gentle embrace, a comforting presence, a feeling of warmth and love. The image of a woman with long, dark hair holding him close lingered. A large hand reached out, gently ruffling Mori's hair. Tears welled up in Mori's eyes, blurring his vision. Suddenly, the writer burst into the room, calling out Mori's name. Mori, overwhelmed by the appearance and the conflicting emotions swirling within him, burst into tears. The bird woman and the writer stared at each other in surprise. AIA floated next to the writer and quietly observed the scene. Later, Ryder spoke to Miri and assured Mori that everything was all right and he could come out now. He offered Mori a manga, a rare and delicious fruit, suggesting they have a snack and perhaps do some drawing. Miri, observing their interaction, quietly exited the room. Ryder turned towards Miri and asked how Mori doing, and sighing, Miri replied that he seemed to need some time alone. Miri commented on the writer's worried expression. The writer admitted to being upset, confessing it was the first time he had seen Mori cry like that. Reflecting on the situation, the writer wondered if he hadn't been as good a caregiver as he'd imagined. Miri introduced herself as Mori's sponsor and the owner of Pay. Later at night, Ryder lay quietly in the large, comfortable bed. In the night, Mori came from under the bed after crying his way to sleep. AIA, fully charged, hovered near Mori, its soft glow illuminating the room. Ryder drifted off to sleep. Miri stood at the bed, watching the writer sleeping. Smacked his face to wake him up, as he pleaded Mori not to do it. Mori slipped out of the room, unnoticed. He padded silently down the hallway, his stomach rumbling. Drawn by the scent of food, he followed his nose to the kitchen. A shadowy figure reached out from the darkness into the kitchen, where a plate of manga sat on the counter. Mori crept closer, sniffing the air. He climbed onto the counter, reaching for the fruit. Mori snatched the plate and scrambled down from the counter in an attempt to climb on the counter again. He climbed onto a chair, taking a hold of the manga. His eyes widened in delight. As he heard a noise, Miri, concerned, watched him from the doorway. Miri, a tall, bird-like woman with white hair, reached for a lantern on a high shelf in the library. Pulling out a large, leather-bound book, she began to read, her multiple eyes scanning the pages. She paused, sniffing the air, a curious expression on her face. She looked up, noticing a small figure moving down the hallway. She followed the sound of tiny footsteps, peeking into the room where Mori was sleeping. Mori, eyes still closed, reached out a hand toward the manga on the table beside him. Miri watched from the doorway, a concerned look on her face. Mori, now awake, spotted the manga and reached for it. Startled by a sudden noise, Mori dropped the manga, his eyes widening in surprise. As he turned towards the source of the sound, Miri, surprised by Mori's reaction, stared at him, her mouth agape. She rushed to exit the kitchen to calm Mori down. Suddenly, a manga started rolling toward him, making Mori worry. Afraid, he hides behind the counter. Miri surveyed the scene. Her heart pounded in her chest. Her eyes widened as she registered the mess. Sitting down next to the overturned basket of fruit, her expression softening as she watched Mori. She picked up a manga, peeking under the table at the hiding child. Mori, hidden in the shadows, watched her, thinking that Mori is hunger and was trying to get the fruit. She gently rolled a manga towards him. Mori blinked in surprise and then scrambled to pick up the fruit. His heart pounded with excitement. He clutched the manga tightly as Miri reached for it again. She saw Mori eating it. Mori, happily munching on the manga. Then another one rolled toward him. He moved from his hideout to get the another fruit and returning to his hide behind the counter. Miri's eyes sparkled with delight. She gently tossed a manga into him one by one, then another and another, creating a slow, gentle rain of fruit. She smiled. Later, in the morning light, Miri watched Mori from the doorway as he sat on the floor, eating manga. As sunlight streamed through the windows, Mori looked up. Ryder told AIA to be quiet to avoid waking Mori. AIA, curious, popped up from behind the sofa, expressing a desire to see Mori as well. Mori sat on the kitchen floor, surrounded by manga peels, as sunlight poured through the kitchen window. He commented, perplexed, about the state of the kitchen. As Mori wandered through the hallway, Ryder's tail wrapped gently around his ankle. Mori, reaching out with a curious hand, looked up at the rider with wide, innocent eyes. The rider, noticing the remnants of manga on Mori's face, asked if he had slept well, telling him he needed to wash up. AIA, scanning Mori, reported a 40% foreign substance detected on his face. Mori lunged forward, clinging to the rider's leg. Amused by Mori's affectionate gesture, the rider asked what was with him this early in the morning and chiding him gently. AIA told Mori to listen. She wanted to tell him what happened yesterday. Miri poured tea for the rider, explaining that she was uncertain if Ryder's friend from the shelter had left due to the language barrier. She explained that she had only tracked in the direction of Ryder's home, expressing gratitude that Ryder had appeared. The rider thanked Miri for her help, admitting he had no idea Mori would have come this way. Miri offered the rider a small, intricately carved box, suggesting he open it. The rider hesitated, then opened the box as a soft glow emanated from within. The rider stared intently at the contents of the small box. Inside, a star fragment shimmered, its facets catching the light. Astonished, the rider exclaimed in surprise, wondering what it was. AIA identified the object as a star fragment, estimating its value to be around 60,000. The rider, ecstatic, declared himself rich. Miri thanked him for his work, assuring him guides would assist them on their way out. The rider, still reeling from the unexpected gift, chuckled. Meanwhile, remembered the memories he created with Mori as he sat by a small campfire, diligently drawing in his notebook. A flashback showed the rider shielding Mori from strange, bat-like creatures in a dark cave. Another flashback showed the pair sharing a quiet moment by the fire, another when Mori has drawn on his face. The rider, watching Mori sleep peacefully in his new bed, admitted he wasn't ready to leave just yet. AIA hovered nearby, watching over the rider's reaction. Miri, overhearing the rider's mumble, asked him to repeat himself. The rider nervously explained that Mori had grown fond of him and would be upset if he suddenly disappeared. He added he wasn't exactly free to leave either. He tried to convince Miri. He reiterated his point, suggesting he stay until Mori adjusted to his departure. AIA observed the conversation, its glowing eyes unblinking. The rider, clarifying his intentions, insisted that was what he meant. Miri, touched by his offer, expressed her gratitude. The rider assured her it was no trouble. He reminisced about their shared experiences, acknowledging the bond they'd formed despite their short time together. Suddenly, a figure entered the room and approached the rider. He was shocked to see the masked figure who chased him. Miri calmly introduced a cloaked figure named Yahello as her aide. She apologized for the rider's outburst, explaining that he had mistaken Yahello for a kidnapper. The rider, embarrassed, chuckled nervously. AIA, intrigued, asked if that was truly the case. As AIA began to explain, the rider interrupted, telling her to be quiet, claiming Mori couldn't understand complex words anyway. He asked Mori if he recognized the place, suggesting he look around with AIA while he spoke with Miri and Yahello. AIA agreed that exploring would be a good idea. Mori, startled by a noise, ran down the hallway with AIA. Miri stood at the end of the hallway. She welcomed them and invited them to sit wherever they felt comfortable. She then addressed the group and suggested they began their discussion. Miri announced that they still hadn't been able to contact Shalom. The rider, puzzled, asked who Shalom was. Miri inquired if he was familiar with the judge, an individual whose notoriety was apparently widespread. Another bird person commented that everyone knows the judge. Miri explained that the judge was the master of earth and the rule of life, holding immense power. She revealed that 7 individuals, including herself, had been granted the ability to open black holes for the judge. She added that Shalom was one of those 7. She further explained that the black hole Jael had used was a small piece of her own power that she had lent him. Miri projected a holographic map, indicating Shalom's domain, which extended from the mountain range to the river of Reden. She pointed to a specific forest on the map, identifying it as the location of the shelter where Mori had stayed. Miri explained that everything fell under Shalom's jurisdiction, necessitating communication through him. She then recounted how even when Mori disappeared, they had been unable to contact Shalom from the shelter, nor had they received their usual newsletter updates about Mori. Miri concluded by noting that this was why they were late in searching for him. 2 other bird people discussed the situation. Miri, reassuring the others, expressed confidence that it was nothing serious and promised to keep sending messages to Shalom, explaining he was a busy person and once asleep, difficult to awaken. Miri asked the rider to stay with Mori until they could make contact. The rider agreed. Another bird person suggested they commence the real meeting. The rider, taken aback, repeated the phrase "the real meeting" in disbelief. A bird person approached the rider, holding a small, wooden tray with a bowl, a cup, and utensils, looking at the rider questioningly. The rider, confused, picked up a spoon, looking at the bird person again. The bird person revealed that the tableware was Mori's, personally crafted the previous day. The rider, observing the miniature size of the tableware, was flabbergasted, questioning how Mori could possibly eat with such tiny utensils. One of the bird people commented on Mori's incredibly small size, explaining that he was only as big as a finger, questioning if he was an ant or something. The rider tried to explain and calm them. The bird people presented a collection of miniature tableware, revealing they'd anticipated the issue and prepared plenty. They then proudly showcased a large bed, specially made for Mori, explaining it would accommodate him even if he divided himself many times over. 2 bird people eagerly presented their creations to the rider. The rider, chuckling, observed that they were getting excited. AIA and Mori started exploring the mansion, moving through the halls, seeing the decorations, watching the garden through the windows, and drawings on the stairs. AIA proceeded to identify various objects in the room to Mori, calling out Mori's attention to something. As AIA confused, AIA identified the object. It looked at a table littered with papers, scraps of fabric, and crafting tools, observing that they appeared to be leftover materials from making something. Mori carefully inspected a detailed drawing, a blueprint of sorts. AIA realized that the cloak was handmade. AIA clarified that it was referring to Mori's cloak. Mori's eyes widened in surprise as he looked around the room, taking in the various toys and crafted items. Mori picked up the blueprint again, his fingers tracing the lines of a circular design. As he visualizes Miri, with a dramatic flourish, sat in a chair beside the table. Mori's gaze intensified, focused, and curious. One of the bird people, mistaking Mori for an intruder, exclaimed and introduced himself to Mori, expressing relief that he was safe. They continued, recounting the lengths they had gone to in order to prevent Miri from searching for him. Mori, fidgeting slightly, answered AIA's question, stating they were exploring the mansion. He asked AIA about it. AIA expressed confusion, commenting on the sudden appearance of such a large building in a field within the city. The other bird person explained it was a villa, personally built by Miri to understand Mori better. AIA and Mori slipped out of the room, eager to continue their exploration. Mori looked back at Miri, a spark of interest in his eyes. Miri noticed him, and Mori turned to look at one of the bird people in the room. Miri's eyes were filled with tears. The rider looked thoughtfully about this situation. He pondered the situation. A panoramic view of the villa, nestled amidst the green landscape, filled the horizon. The rider suggested that it would be best if he and Miri became friends. Miri, while amenable, asked for suggestions on how to achieve that. The writer had a sudden inspiration. He outlined Operation Befriend Mori, with the first step being tempt with snacks. Miri, carrying a plate of cookies, called out to Mori. Other bird people excitedly shared cookies with Mori, who eagerly accepted the treat. Ryder smiled at this realization. The second step, show interest in favorite items. An array of crayons, manga fruit, and cookies illustrated the idea. Miri, surrounded by Mori's favorite things, looked pleased. The writer instructed AIA to casually stroll by in front of Mori, showing off a drawing of a Christmas tree, Radina, and Mori that he thought he'd seen in Mori's notebook. Mori immediately recognized the image, grabbing the cookie and sitting down to eat it. He looked startled and instantly protective, exclaiming that he'd return it immediately. Another mission failed. Next, the third step, show a familiar appearance. The rider proudly pointed to himself, suggesting that appearing as rider on a bike would double the effect. He instructed AIA to bring out the bike. AIA complied, producing the motorcycle. The rider instructed Miri to hold the handlebars and press a specific button. She gripped the handlebars, her finger hovering over the red button. With a roar, the bike surged forward, startling everyone and sending Miri flying. As AIA explained, he did the most of driving these days. Next, AIA, annoyed, noted that he mostly did the driving these days. The fourth step, recreate how you become friends. The writer told AIA to put on his clothes, explaining that the masked guy was the villain, and she, wearing his cloth, would come save Mori. Mori, sniffling, playing with his bag as a large shadow appears. The masked man looked down at Mori. The writer and Miri, waiting for the right time to intervene. Mori, with surprising strength cuteness, knocked the masked man down. The writer, shocked, protested the masked man's actions, reminding her they had agreed to be bully. He tried to make a point, multiple attempts, they all failed. Rain fell, creating glistening puddles on the windowsill. The drops streamed down the glass, reflecting the muted light. Mori snuggled under the blankets, his tiny form almost lost in the large bed. He drifted off to sleep, a serene expression on his face. His eye, infused with strange, glitching colors, twitched. The unsettling image filled Mori's vision. He awoke with a gasp, his eyes wide with terror, clutching his small legs. Mori, eyes wide with fear and confusion, trembled in his bed. He looked around, startled by a noise. Mori watched the window, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room and revealing Mori's cloaked figure. Startled by the sudden, intense light, Mori cried out, instinctively seeking safety. He peeked out from behind a door, his small form shaking. Mori quietly padded across the room and approached the door. Meanwhile, the rider tinkered with AIA, a bright green light emanating from his hands. Mori peered cautiously up at the rider, his expression filled with apprehension. He stared at the large grandfather clock next to the window, noticing the raindrops streaming down the glass. He scanned the room, his small body tense with worry, before peeking behind the door. The door swung open, revealing Mori, peering out cautiously. Miri sat in a rocking chair, a gentle fire crackling in the hearth, surrounded by bookshelves. She was sleeping soundly as Mori approached her. He stopped before a small table, his attention caught by a large, open book titled Child Behavior Observation. He examined the book. A question mark formed above his head as he tried to decipher the contents. A page titled How to Have a Friendly Conversation with Children catching his eye. He crept closer to Miri, his curiosity piqued. Mori, in a sudden surge of fear, with Miri, sudden motion. He reached out to her and gently sit on her lap. He snuggled close to her, his eyes wide and uncertain. His gaze shifted, taking in the surroundings with a newfound curiosity. He burrowed into Miri's embrace, seeking comfort and reassurance. She was still asleep. She continued to hold him close, her presence radiating a sense of calm and protection. Mori's eyes sparkled with curiosity. Images floated in his mind. Handwritten notes, a small doll, and colorful drawings, fragments of his past and present. The word mother echoed in his thoughts, a concept he seemed to grasp, alongside the memories of warmth and affection. Miri sat calmly as she started to open her eyes. She wondered when she had fallen asleep and, realizing she needed to return to her room, gently roused Mori. She was startled by Mori's presence. Completely flustered and unsure of why Mori was with her or when he had arrived, Miri's mind raced. She desperately tried to figure out what to do, deciding to call for the rider and AIA. Mori nestled contentedly in her arms, the warmth of her embrace lulling him. Miri sat by the glowing fireplace. Mori, still held gently, continued to drift in and out of sleep. A single tear trickled down Miri's face. Mori was wrapped in a blanket. Miri held Mori close, gazing at him with a mixture of affection and concern. The fire crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows on the walls. A bright, clear sky filled the view from the window, promising a beautiful day. The rider awoke with a start, yelling in his sleep. AIA complimented him on a job well done, though it had taken longer than expected. AIA, noting a warning about overclock, reminded him to avoid overdoing it. Rider reminding him to avoid pushing himself too hard. AIA floated beside the rider, agreeing to take it easy for a while. Suddenly, the other bird people burst in, greeting the rider enthusiastically. Confused, the rider greeted them back. One of the bird people, carrying a bundle, asked if he had slept well and informed him that mail had arrived. The rider, still half asleep, acknowledged the mail. The bird person offered to retrieve it for him. The rider, grateful, thanked him and instructed him to bring it to Miri. He descended the stairs, his tail swishing behind him. He reviewed a document, a thoughtful expression on his face. The document warned of danger, featuring images of the rider, Miri, AIA, and Mori. AIA, though silent, successfully delivered the message. The rider and Miri greeted each other warmly. Miri responded, appearing cheerful. The rider asked if she was busy, to which she replied that she had nothing but time. The rider then brought up the topic of Mori's clothes, hesitantly. He suddenly remembered he was currently wanted, a detail he had forgotten in his concern for Mori. His surprise at seeing Mori cry had overshadowed his own predicament. Miri suggested they get ready to go out. The rider, taken aback, questioned their destination. She clarified they were headed to the center. The rider, confused, questioned what center she was referring to. Miri replied to the city center. The rider was dumbfounded, dripping with sweat. Several white-clad figures, their forms sleek and minimalist, welcomed the group with open arms. They stood within a large, stark white room, accented by dark, polished stones. The rider, holding Mori, with Miri and AIA beside him, looked around in confusion, questioning their location. Miri explained that this was where she often had her clothes tailored. The figures demonstrated their process, showcasing a virtual design that could be modified in real time. They emphasized their specialization in 100% custom-made clothing, a unique philosophy that required in-person fittings. Miri added that finding human clothes was difficult, and she preferred to rely on professionals. Mori, nestled in Miri's arms, shifted restlessly. One of the tailors greeted Mori, acknowledging they had heard much about him. Mori, though, looked slightly intimidated, but they reassured him, revealing they had received countermeasures from Miri. They gestured, holding various items, a cookie, a feather duster, among fruit and nail polish. Mori's eyes widened with a mixture of curiosity and delight. The rider commented on how it's dangerous to follow so easily. The rider, still reeling from the sudden portal, expressed his disbelief at the extravagance. He asked AIA to locate the cameras. AIA, while scanning, reported difficulty due to security measures. However, it identified one object behind the rider, two in front, and security personnel within 5 meters outside the door. The rider debated his next move: stay quiet and return to the mansion, or quickly pack up and leave. He weighed his options, his expression grim. Mori emerged, dressed in an adorable bear costume, holding a pot of honey, surrounded by buzzing bees. The rider, overwhelmed by the cuteness, exclaimed and got angry. Miri began to cry. Miri gestured with a glowing card, proposing a solution. Another outfit appeared, Mori in a ruffled collar and coat with small wings. Miri, seeing Mori's new attire, deemed it too good and teared up. The rider, Miri, and Mori worked together, customizing a design on a glowing card. Mori appeared in a miniature biker outfit, complete with a tiny skull-adorned motorcycle. AIA declared a lack of taste of the rider. Finally, AIA's outfit materialized, a simple, elegant design. AIA declared it perfect. Mori, now sporting a smart outfit with a small green bow, elicited an ooh from Miri and oh from rider. The rider suddenly remembered the wanted poster, blaming it on the pervert masked guy's fault, not his. He rationalized his behavior. He tried to talk to Miri. He remembered the pervert guy questioned how someone as dangerous as him could raise a human. The rider's expression darkened as he intercepted Miri's reaction, so he stopped himself. The rider brought up the letter Miri had written for Mori, the one with the lovely circle, and his curiosity about its meaning. Miri shifted uncomfortably. She handed the rider a photograph. The photograph depicted a small, brown, furry creature in a field. Miri identified it as Mori. Miri explained that she was processing documents when she received a letter from Shalom. It resembled a city-wide flyer, which she almost ignored. She played the video from the letter. It showed a vast green expanse. The video turned out to be of Mori. The video zoomed out, revealing a distant building and the surrounding landscape. It zoomed further, focusing on a small creature on a grassy hill. Miri questioned what she was seeing. The image continued to focus on the small creature, revealed to be Mori sitting on a hilltop. Miri's eyes reflected the bright light. Her expression reflected her surprise. Miri thought the creature in the field was far too round, matching her initial assumption. The playback ended. Miri replayed the video. She examined the photo. They revealed that the video was taken from afar because Mori was scared of the camera, so they filmed him watching an ant. The rider regained his composure, realizing he had already chosen a gift for Mori, finding the whole situation boring. The rider hesitated, his posture stiff. AIA suggested using that material for the bottom of Mori's outfit. A card was generated, and Miri turned on the virtual display. Mori fidgeted, his eyes darting around nervously. He stared, his expression shifting from confusion to fear. Mori's eyes filled with tears, and glitches appeared around his face. He was looking at the circle in the room. He continued to stare, his face reflecting a mix of shock and terror. Mori, eyes wide with terror, scrambled away from the circular light. He retreated rapidly, his small form a blur against the stark white backdrop. The rider and Miri stared in shock and confusion. Mori ran very fast, trying to escape. As he hit someone, he was tossed and turned in the air. He looked down, his expression a mixture of fear and bewilderment. Mori looked up, his gaze pleading. The rider, adrenaline surging, shouted Mori's name and dashed forward. AIA called out to the rider, warning him of the danger of the security cameras. The rider, ignoring AIA's warning, sprinted towards Mori. The rider, noticing the security camera as it begins to turn toward him suddenly. A hand is placed on the rider's face. It was Miri's as she shielded him from the camera. Miri's black hand reached out Mori. A swirling vortex of light and energy enveloped them. Mori, caught in the vortex, was surrounded by floating flowers. The trio drifted through the swirling energy. The rider reached out to Mori and screamed his name. Mori, tears streaming down his face, looked at the rider with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. The rider and Miri, concern etched on their faces, checked Mori for injuries, their voices filled with worry. Tears welled up in Mori's eyes as he looked at them, overwhelmed by the ordeal. The group floated in a vast, starlit expanse, a breathtaking panorama surrounding them. Miri near a sealed envelope. She had put Mori to sleep in a bed nearby. Miri commented that Mori's reaction wasn't simply due to the light. The rider agreed. noting that Mori had never reacted this way to bright lights before, even when he had accidentally burned down trees. AIA coughed, correcting the rider's memory of the incident. The rider explained that they had added more electric lights than flames to the mansion. He stated they did so based on records indicating Mori's friend had been with him, and the records said they only used oil lamps or candles. AIA added that there were also records of them reacting sensitively to spotlights. The rider remembered using a flashlight in the cave, which had suddenly become bright. He noted the store's circular beam. Miri affirmed it was a circular light. Miri looked at the many books in the room. The room was filled with books and papers, illuminated by the soft glow of a lamp. Mori, inspired, mimicked Miri's actions, pulling a book and placing it in front of AIA. The rider, Miri, and AIA examined the book. Mori drew in a book, Miri and rider looking over. A bird person expressed confusion, unsure of what was happening. The other bird people gathered in a darkened room, bathed in the glow of a single spotlight. A shadow play began, depicting a wolf watching pigs build houses. Mori, entranced, watched the shadows. The story continued, showing the pigs deciding to build their own houses. The rider hid behind some leaves, observing the scene. The rider questioned whether it was a shadow play. Miri confirmed, suggesting they start with a square-shaped light beam. She explained they would slowly make it circular as the audience focused on the play. Mori was seated comfortably, watching the show. Miri, the rider, and AIA worked together, creating the shadow play. Miri explained that this was how they created pleasant memories. AIA then suggested using drawing. AIA and the rider reviewed Mori's drawings, realizing the connection to the circle. The rider stated it must be when. The shadow play continued, the little pigs deciding to trust each other and work together. Miri presented a house. Rider had a question look. They created an ultra-mega amazing super alloy fourth house to fight against the wolf. Mori continued watching. Mori laughed joyously, captivated by the performance. The rider and Miri, confused by the story's sudden twist, exchanged bewildered glances. Miri and the rider, surprised, realized what was happening. The shadow play continued as the faraway mama pig and faraway wolf appeared. A single, small light shone on only one of the mansion's room. A figure approached, their boots echoing in the silence. The figure walked towards the statues. He was looking at the faces of the statues. Then he called Miri. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the room where Mori lay in bed. He opened his eyes, a small drool escaping his lips. The bright sunlight was dazzling. Mori blinked as AIA greeted him with a good morning. AIA noted that he had woken up earlier than usual. Mori stretched and yawned, his small body arching. He spun around in bed, his movements playful and energetic. He looked up with big, innocent eyes. He began to crawl towards the edge of the bed, repeating the motion. The rider, already awake, reached out and scooped Mori into his arms, suggesting they sleep for just 10 more minutes. He settled back into bed. Mori nestled beside him. Mori ran towards the door. He was wearing his yellow boots that he got from Radina. A bird person, carrying a bucket, greeted Mori and asked if he had slept well. He cautioned Mori against running, as it was dangerous. He extended his hand towards the door. Miri reached out, offering her hands to Mori. The scene shifted to an exterior view of the mansion, bathed in sunlight, with a caption noting that 1 month had passed since Mori began staying there. Mori, wearing his boots, stomped on a patch of floor. He joyfully splashed in the floor, with AIA floating beside him. The bird person exclaimed in dismay, lamenting that he had just cleaned the floor. AIA asked if Mori was hungry. It hovered, scanning. The other bird people announced that Mori was hungry, carrying various food items. Mori, looking embarrassed, was having a filter applied. Miri, flustered, watched as vegetables were chopped with precision. The ingredients were flying in the air. A large pot, filled with a fluffy, colorful mixture, sat over a roaring fire. Various food items, eggs, tomatoes, bread, and vegetables, floated towards Mori. Mori, looking slightly dazed, stumbled and fell, AIA catching him just in time. Giles gently washed Mori's face. AIA, watching the scene, questioned if Giles was washing Mori like laundry. Mori, peeking from behind a door, watched as Miri sat at a table, working with glowing parchments. Miri continued her work, her expression focused. Mori, his eyes sparkling, watched her intently. The writer, seeing Mori, commented on his studiousness. Mori, surrounded by drawings, sat with Miri and AI drawing to his heart's content. The writer asked what he was doing, and Mori replied that he was trying to copy the letters on the word cards, although incorrectly. AIA was surprised by Mori's academic pursuit. Miri showed Mori a drawing and pointed out its similarities, but the writer dismissed it, claiming her judgment was clouded. Mori retrieved a book labeled Mung and offered it to AI, suggesting it be read to him. AIA instructed Mori to assume the Pyrop, ready position, and Mori began to read. The book seemed to discuss some kind of phenomenon, potentially related to division, a concept the writer had mentioned before. The writer clarified that he didn't know the details. The method of division varied slightly between species and could differ by hundreds of years. Essentially, when a body's lifespan was up, the cells went to sleep and returned to their original state. They divided, either from one to one or from one to many, like AIA originating from the judge's fourth finger and Shalom being the first. It was stated that a safe place was needed for this process, as one became completely defenseless when entering Pyrop. Miri wondered if it might be difficult for Mori. Ryder and Miri continued their discussion as Mori disappeared from their sight. A bird person exclaimed in surprise. Mori was once again scribbling on the wall. The bird person instructed Mori to clean the wall himself, crying. Mori, looking remorseful, began to cry. Miri reassured him and told him not do it again, warning that Giles would be called if he misbehaved. The writer, upon hearing that mail had arrived, exclaimed that he would get it. The writer tried to grab it. Miri was holding the mail. The writer eagerly reached for a golden envelope. Miri thanked the writer, who responded that it was no problem. Miri opened and read the letter. The writer, seeing Miri's reaction, was shocked. Miri suggested they talk for a moment. The writer, confused, stammered. He followed her, his boots clicking on the floor. He questioned what was happening, wondering if he had seen something incorrectly. The writer, walking along a balcony, wondered if Miri had noticed something, deciding he should speak up first. He approached her. Miri presented with two small, rune-inscribed stones. He identified them as stones that opened the door to the judge's chamber. The writer's expression was a mix of surprise and apprehension. Miri revealed that she had contacted the judge. The writer was stunned, looking down at the stones. He muttered the word judge, his eyes wide with disbelief. The writer questioned whether Miri had reported him and how long she had known, accusing her of lowering his guard to throw him in jail. Miri asked the writer if he had ever considered joining Patch.